You so much to everyone who is joining us this afternoon or this morning, wherever you may be located. Welcome to the Care.com webinar, Supporting Kids Who Learn Differently. I'm Emily Paisner, the Director of Marketing here at Care.com. And today we have author and parent coach Debbie Reber here with us to share ideas for ways parents can best support their children who think and learn differently, especially during this challenging time. Debbie is a parenting activist, a New York Times bestselling author, podcast host, and speaker who founded Tilt Parenting, a top resource and podcast for parents like her who are raising differently wired children. Her newest book is called Differently Wired: Raising an Exceptional Child in a Conventional World, and it is a must read for all parents. Thank you to those who sent questions in advance. Debbie will try to address as many of them as she can throughout her session. If you have any questions during the webinar, please feel free to submit them in the chat box and she will try to get to them at the end of her presentation. Debbie, thank you so much again for being here. Over to you. Oh, you're still on mute.
Okay, now I'm hoping you can hear me.
Yes, all good.
Awesome. Okay, let me go back to presenting this. And thank you so much. I'm really looking forward to this, and I have a lot to go through, so I'm going to dive right in. And thank you also for the questions in advance. So many great questions, and I did try to weave a lot of the answers throughout this. So I wanted to start by talking about the way I've been thinking about this time in our life right now. We have Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And then I was thinking about, in the midst of a pandemic and with differently wired kids, the needs are a little different. And so I put together this chart. So emotional safety has to be kind of number one. What I'm hearing from so many parents is a lot of concern about academic growth, falling behind, regressions, certainly challenges related to social connection. But really, I can't overemphasize this idea that where we really want to start right now and really put most of our energy is on our child's emotional safety. And that has to be the kind of the strong foundation. Then of course we have physical safety, which is now more complicated than it has been in the past. Then the social connection is so important. When those needs are met, the personal growth and development can happen. And when a child is feeling safe and all those other needs are met, then they're going to be more available for academic growth. So I just wanted to even start with this to talk about that idea, because this is a reframe, I think, for a lot of people, to really just think about emotional safety as being the most important thing that we can be providing for our kids right now. So the way that I see it, there are a couple of big questions that we want to think about as we are moving through this school year. This is a moving target, right? For so many of us. I know with our school, I'm in New York, and with our school right now, we're fully remote. It may move to hybrid, and it's kind of depending on information. And I know that's the case for so many of us. So what we want to be thinking about is, what are all the choices that we have? And thinking about that, whether we have a choice to do remote full time, or maybe we've made a choice and we're realizing, oh, this is not working best for my child. Always be focusing on what is the right fit for my child right now. So I would actually say, even in times when we're not in the midst of a global pandemic, educating differently wired kids is always a moving target. There are very few of us who are going to find the right school in early elementary and be like, okay, I'm good to go. We've got school set for the next 10, 12 years. So often it really is about staying on top of, is our child thriving? Is he or she not thriving? Would a better environment suit for this year? So this is always a moving target. So I just wanted to kind of put that out there. Being nimble, that's what I talk a lot about. We want to be as nimble as we can be with these kids. And then thinking about, how can we ensure our kids' needs are met if we're thinking about that hierarchy above. Just being mindful of the priorities that we have for ourselves and for our kids and what they really need from us right now. And then we don't want to forget ourselves. And I'm going to talk about this a little bit at the end. We have to address this question: how can we prioritize ourselves and practice self-care in the midst of everything that's going on, which feels really hard, right? This is hard stuff we're going through. So, regardless of what model we're moving through, the things that we want to think about are the values and goals for our family and for our kids, and how we define success. I'm going to talk about this a little more in depth. We want to think about school policies, and we want to think about our homework policies. I got a lot of questions about remote learning and distance learning and homework and kids who aren't feeling motivated. So we want to think about these things. So let's start with the values and goals. This is just a great place to start because we need to be really clear on what matters to us as a family, what matters to us as parents of these kids. And we want to think about these because we are being kind of challenged and pushed on so many levels, financially, emotionally, politically, physically. We're really spread thin. And so, kind of having that foundation of what our values are as a family and being really explicit about them when we're talking with our kids can be really just helpful. It helps us all feel more grounded. It contributes to that sense of emotional safety. And one of the things, if you haven't had a conversation with your kids about what your values are as a family, you can bring this up at the table, the dinner table. Just talk about this. Even ask your kids, do you know what values are? See what they say, and ask them, do you know what our family values are? Like, if you had to name some values that you think are important to us as a family, what do you think they would be? And it can be really interesting. Oftentimes they're pretty spot on. But this is something we want to kind of cultivate in our families, is this strong sense of values. And that will be a good foundation for us. Then we want to think about success. So defining what success in this context, right? In this school year that we are living through, what does success look like? And you can think about this as, by the end of this year, by the end of 2021, where would my child ideally be academically, socially, with executive functioning skills, with independence, with personal growth, personal development, all of those things. We want to think about that while we're being really realistic, and also while we are lowering the bar. I'm going to talk about lowering the bar later, but I think it's important to bring up when we're thinking about success because, things are different and we're all experiencing this, this COVID brain, or, a lot of us just are not operating at the level that we're used to when it comes to taking care of our own things. And the same is true for our kids, right? And so we want to just be realistic about that and think, maybe if we can get my child through this pandemic on the other end, feeling like they have some resiliency skills, or feeling like they've learned a new way to connect with other kids, or having a little bit better understanding of who they are, or having a closer relationship with us as parents. Being ready to expand their world. There are a lot of differently wired kids who struggle socially, and actually being more isolated is getting them really ready to want to broaden their worlds in this way. So you can think about success through these, metrics, as opposed to, certain grades that we'll get in class or other things. We just want to be really kind of realistic about what success can look like here. And then once we know what that is, we want to think about, what do we need to set our kid up for success in this way? What kind of support could you use as a parent as you're working towards this? What kind of support could your child use? I often talk about something called plugging the leaks in our family. So we have to know where the leaks are in order to proactively plug them. So we want to just think about it, spend a little time writing down what would actually really contribute to us reaching those goals. It might be a therapist, it might be a mentor, a tutor, an activity. You might start integrating family meetings if you're not already doing those. Those could really help move towards success. And then lastly, how can you make a plan for your family, for success for your family? So, what can you create right now? And I know as we're kind of having this conversation, winter is coming and things are going to be changing again. We're going to be more indoors. We're hearing all kinds of doom and gloom on the news. So we want to think about how can we plan for what's coming next. Again, the family meetings, if you're not already doing those, I really recommend, thinking of yourself as a unit. We are, right? We're our own little pods. And creating that space where you can really think about how can we achieve these goals together as a family. All right, I'm going to move on to school policies. So, school is different for everyone. And so I know that there are people watching this whose kids are back in school and it might seem very normal in some ways. Many of us are doing distance learning, and then a lot of us are doing this kind of hybrid. I also know a lot of families have pulled their kids out and chosen to homeschool this year because they feel that's the way to better meet their child's needs in this unique time. Regardless of what school looks like, it's really important to be clear on what your in class policies are going to be for attending to learning, right? And by attending to learning, I got a lot of questions about my child isn't paying attention on Zoom calls. And I will address that in a more in depth later, but this is very common. And so we want to think about with our kids, we want to do all of this in collaboration with our kids so they have some buy-in to what we're talking about. But what are our expectations surrounding attending to their learning, attending to school, and design it with them, right? Talk to them. What do you think attending to class looks like? What would you like to see in terms of your school performance? What policies would you make for school right now? So do this very collaboratively, and it doesn't matter how young your kids are. I'll just say that we can do this from a very young age. They may not have as many ideas when they're younger. They may have amazing ideas. So we want to develop this in tandem with them. This is a really important question we want to ask ourselves too. What is your child willing to do? And I use this word willing very intentionally because I get asked all the time, how can I make my child do X? How can I get my child to do Y? My child needs to do this, this, and this. How can I make that happen? The truth is, we cannot make our children do anything. I'm sure those of us raising differently wired kids, we're very aware of this, but it bears repeating. We can't make them want to learn. We can't make them want to pay attention. We can't make them care. We can't make them feel motivated. We cannot do that. They are their own people, right? They're on they have their own theory of mind. They have their own way of looking at the world, their own perspective, their own experience. So we want to know that and instead remember, this is very important. We want to remember that our kids want to feel good about themselves. They want to feel motivated. They want to be successful. They want to do well. And if they're not, it's because they can't right now, whether they are, they don't have the skills necessary, or they're feeling too emotionally depleted, or whatever the reason. They're not choosing to not do well. They want to. So we want to approach this from a perspective of, I notice you're struggling with motivation right now. We can say, I know how hard it is to care about school right now. It's really a crazy time. Things feel so different. You miss your friends. I have some ideas that might help. Would you be willing to try one of them? I use this language all the time. Would you be willing to? It feels so much better for a child to hear that than, I think you should do this. Why don't you do this? I know how to do this. Here's what you should do. That is going to, especially for a kid who is feeling already maybe a little in fight or flight and not super grounded, that is going to put up their defenses right away. So What would you be willing to do? I have some ideas. Would you be willing to give that a try? And then we can have our suggestions. Our suggestions might be, would you be willing to get some extra help? Would you be willing to talk to your teacher? I could help you write that email if you wanted some help. Would you be willing to go for a walk with me first thing in the morning? Sometimes that helps me, it helps my brain get kind of organized. Would you be willing to try going to sleep earlier? I think we're all sleep deprived in this house. So, you can see we can throw out suggestions. And what we want is our kids to have some buy-in, feel like they have some control over this, and feel that we're respecting them and their experience. And that's what we want, because ultimately, right, we're raising adults, we're raising human beings, and we want them to know who they are and know what they need and know how to ask for what they need and feel good about themselves. So, this is a really important reframe. Another thing to think about when it comes to school is, what can you take off your plate? Because I know so many of us, especially if kids are remote learning and we're working from home, and it is a big juggle and we're all kind of running thin. So, are there things you can take off of your plate? And then, are there things you can take off of your child's plate? So, thinking about this idea of lowering demands in the household in general, lowering demands that our kids are feeling, can help create a more safe environment. And it can help our kids, especially if they're suffering from, I've been reading about this surge capacity. There was a great article in Elemental a few weeks ago. It says, your surge capacity is depleted. It's why you feel so awful. And I was like, oh, yeah, that totally resonates. And our kids' surge capacity is depleted, right? We're not operating at our best. And so, thinking about school wise, especially, are there ways we can reduce their stressors and take some things off of their plate? So, let's talk about homework. So, will our kids do homework at all? What will they do? So, I think this is something worth just thinking about, especially now for kids who are hybrid learning or remote learning. They're already at home all the time. They're doing work at home, they're doing school at home, and then they're expected to do additional work in the same space, usually, and really at a place where they just want to get in their PJs and play Minecraft or whatever they want to do. It can feel really demoralizing for our kids. And there's a lot of just wondering why, right? Why am I doing this? Why should this matter? I don't get the point of this. The motivation, again, is really just not there. For younger kids too, I think it's worth considering whether or not you want them to do homework at all. There's a lot of evidence, research to suggest that homework in the elementary school years is really not serving any meaningful purpose. And so, if you are raising a kid in K-5, and they're being asked to do kind of homework that feels rote or meaningless, this might be a place to push back a little bit and say, actually, you've done enough school. I'll talk to your teacher. You're not going to be doing this in addition right now. You need time to just kind of chill out. So, if you're noticing that homework is creating more anxiety in your child's life, see what you can modify there. Then there's the question of, where will homework happen? Also, where will school happen? So, this is something, my friend Seth Perler, and if you're not familiar with him, he is an executive function coach. His website is sethperler.com. He's amazing. He's my go-to person on all things executive function. But he talks about something called the sacred study space, and really just creating a place that is just for homework or just for schoolwork. And I know that can be hard for those of us, I'm living in a pretty small apartment here in Brooklyn, and having a sacred study space is tricky. But somewhere, so that mentally our kids are getting the signal that this is a place where X happens. This is a place for schoolwork. This is a place for homework. It might just be a chair. Like, our sacred study space for homework is an orange chair in my bedroom. So it can be kind of simple, but that physical shift can make a big difference in helping our kids kind of start to relate and identify a place, a location with homework, with schoolwork. But you want to do this again with your child. Help them figure out where the sacred study space is going to be and where that's going to happen. And then this is a really important one. How will you and your child navigate the homework relationship? I know that homework and schoolwork can create a lot of conflict between parents and our kids. And so having a conversation with our child about how are we going to navigate this relationship? How are we going to do this together? That is really important when it comes to preserving our connection. And our connection and our relationship with our child is the most important thing right now, right? If you're doing family meetings, this is a great topic to bring up at family meetings. And what I'm talking about is coming up with your own policies with your child about, will they do homework on their own? Do they want to co-work? Sometimes I go sit at the dining room table and after dinner and I'll work and I'll invite my son to come join me, and sometimes he does. Are you going to remind your child if they forget, or are you going to kind of hands off and it's their thing? This will depend on their age and what their skill level is, but you want to know what these things are. And you can ask your child, how do you want to be supported in doing your schoolwork? Do you want me to remind you? Do you want me to? And if so, how should I do that? Do you want me to just what do you want me to say? We can get really explicit. If we design this in advance with our kids, it will really prevent so much of that nagging, the conflict, the explosions that so many people experience. So work these things out with our kids. And they might have suggestions that you're going to be like, I don't think that's going to work. But I would say give it a try anyway. Say, let's try your way for a week, and then let's check in again and see if that was really working. And then you'll have some evidence to support your claim. And then I'm just going to mention this. I talked about it a little bit, the boundaries that you'll set with homework. There's an amazing book called The Self-Driven Child. It's by Ned Johnson and William Stixrud. It's kind of my Bible right now. And there's a line in there that I use all the time. And it is this: I love you too much to fight with you about your homework. You can replace it with schoolwork. I love you too much to fight with you about this. That feels so good to say. And it instantly kind of helps our kids not feel defensive about things and know that we're prioritizing the relationship. And we can follow that up by saying, I'm available if you need help. If you want, I have some ideas about how this might work. Let me know if you want to hear them. I'll be working after dinner if you want to talk through some things. Make ourselves available and supportive. Think of ourselves as a coach. But if we draw that boundary, which is really hard, I'm going to just say this is a hard boundary, but setting that boundary for yourself, making that part of your policy is going to feel a lot better. You can also set office hours. I do this. You can say, check in with your child earlier and say, I am available before dinner. So from 5 to 7, I'm around. Let me know. I'm happy to help you with anything you need, but I won't, this is for older kids. I won't be, reminding you about this, but know that I'm there. But I won't impose myself on you. So you can set really clear boundaries. Because what we ultimately want is for these kids to start advocating for themselves, recognizing when they need help and how to ask for help. And so there's a lot of great skill development that can happen in this time of COVID. Okay, I'm moving on here. Let's talk about supporting through some specific challenges. There were a lot of questions around this, and I'll go into some of this in more detail as well. But there's a lot of concern about falling behind on schoolwork right now. And here's what I would say. We want our kids to feel bought in, right? We've already talked about the fact that we can't make them care. We can't make them study. We can't make them do better. Depending on the age of our child, we might want to actually let them fail a class, a grade, whatever. I know that sounds really radical, but there again is a lot of evidence in the idea that for a child to really become self-directed, motivated, they need to kind of go through some of these challenges. The key for this is to not shame our kids for it. Um, because we want to be supportive. We want to um, always offer ourself as a coach or support. Is there any way I can help you? All of these things. Um, but depending on the age of the child, if it's an older child, we don't want to impose. We need to kind of let them figure some things out for themselves. For kids who are younger, if their grades are really dropping, then it's also finding out why, right? What's going on that this is not working right now? And are there other ways that we can have my child show their competency? Are there other ways that my child can do this assignment that will work better for her right now? Because this, learning style, what we're doing school wise, is not really connecting with her unique learning needs. So, there's ways we can advocate. Um, there are ways that we can step back, but overall, whatever we do, we want to make sure that we're not shaming our kids or making them feel bad about these things. Because again, we know that this is not what they're choosing to do. No child wants to fail a class or fail a grade. And if they are tanking, it's because they're maybe feeling increased anxiety, depression, lack of motivation, all things which are really spiking right now, right? That's almost normal within the context of this pandemic. So we want to address those things and worry about the schoolwork later. We also have the idea of being pulled, to other screen activities. This is a hard one. I wish I had like the magic answer for you, like, oh, just do this. Um, this is a really tough one. I got questions about this, being pulled to other activities. We can set our kids up for success. A lot of parents use software that limits the applications that are available on screens. We can do the best we can to create a distraction-free environment. And this is a tricky one at a certain point too. Again, we ultimately want our kids to be able to regulate their own screen time. So our job, we want to try to find ways to build in uh, strategies or approaches for them to just start to be aware of what they're doing, right? And why. And, oh, I noticed you just switched screens. What happened? And see if they can start making connections. Oh, I don't know. I just spaced out. I didn't even think I was doing it. We don't know why. So if we can approach this challenge through that more curiosity mindset and try to uncover what's going on and get our kids involved in that, we might be able to come up with some ideas together for how to address that. And then, of course, Zoom anxiety is a real thing. A lot of adults are struggling with Zoom anxiety. I know this is challenging because some schools are requiring that a child stays on screen. If Zoom is creating undue stress or anxiety for your child, there is no learning that's going to happen, period. Like when a child is in fight or flight mode, which is what's happening perpetually for a lot of these kids, if their anxiety triggers are spiked, then what's the point? There's no learning. This is a complete wash. So we'll talk more about how to advocate for what your child needs, but think about what would actually work. What would work? The Zoom stuff is not working. My child is getting really anxious. What's another way that my child can participate that is going to feel safer for her? And that's what we're going to ask for. All right, a couple of ideas for smoother remote learning. So, this is hard, right? We're all juggling spaces and sharing devices and chargers and things. So it can be helpful to just set up like a charging station for all the devices. So you're not like running around, oh my gosh, my AirPods are, need this and I need that. Like think about creating like a command central almost for remote learning / remote working and have everything there. So everyone knows that's where you get the chargers, that's where you charge your phone, that's where you plug in your headphones, that's where you do all the things. Building in breaks and movement is so important. And I will just say I'm not doing a great job at this. with my child. I'm doing okay for myself, but it's so important if these kids are sitting down in front of a screen, making sure that they're getting up and moving their bodies, go for a walk around the block, or have them do, 20 jumping jacks. And, you can make it fun. You could do a dance break. I used to do that when I was homeschooling my child. We would put on some dance music and have a little dance party in the living room, which I'm sure the neighbors really appreciated. But, just find creative ways, but make sure you build in those breaks. And then talk again with teachers about how your child can best participate. And you can be really explicit. Like, I can't emphasize this enough. There are no rules right now. Everyone is making this up as they go along. Every school, no matter what their model, if their kids are in school or they're remote learning, everyone's making it up. And there is no one way to do this. There's no one right way to do this. So this is the time where we can really just get creative and ask for what we want, and expect much less pushback than we would in normal times, because it would be hard to defend their position. Like, oh no, we never do it this way, because there's no precedent. So be explicit about that and think about what would actually work for my child. And then if we're doing hybrid learning, then there are some more considerations, right? Making sure that our kids understand what the safety issues are. I know, many of our kids are already back and dealing with this, but a lot of kids have worries and concerns about this. And the more we can be proactive in solving problems, the better. Just so the more information our kids have, we don't want to over-inform them on scary things, but just so they feel empowered and armed with information about the what ifs that they might be worried about, that can be helpful. And then same thing, we want to think about, where is the homework going to happen? How are we going to stay organized? Because going back and forth to school and having workspace here and then stuff at school can be really hard for kids, especially with executive functioning challenges. So we want to really be mindful of that and think about, okay, how can we really stay organized here? And then again, this is a great time to be talking about social responsibility and our values around that, as we send our kids out into the world, where everyone's kind of actions can impact other people. All right, so before I move on to questions, I'm just checking the time. I just wanted to share a couple of things that have been helping me navigate these first few months back to school. These are 5 things that have been helping me get through this time. They're things I'm thinking about and focusing on and noticing and considering. And a lot of what I'm focused on are the things that we can control, because there's a lot that we can't control right now. But the thing that we can control right now is what we can do for ourselves as parents to help us best show up for our kids. All right, so I'm going to just share, these are 5. They're not strategies, they're more just things that I'm really like thinking about, and they're framing the way that I'm moving through this time, and I hope they're helpful for you. So the first is to remember that no one is motivated right now, and that's okay. So motivation came up a lot in the questions. It comes up a lot in my parent community. And the truth is that there is nowhere to go. We're in the midst of a global crisis, and that's just where we are. There's something I actually wanted to share. I have a quote here for you. In this time of crisis, like that, a lot of us are hitting a wall. It's called the 6-month wall. I read this article from this woman who is, she's kind of been in hardship situations and emergency relief, and just when you're really always facing tough challenges. And she's like, this is what happens. It's a 6-month hump. She says the wall is real and normal. And frankly, it's not productive to try to ram your head through it. It will break naturally in about 4 to 6 weeks if you write it out. Of course, there are things we have to do: work, teach, cook, exercise, but don't expect to be sparklingly happy or wildly creative in the middle of your wall. She says it's not permanent. Trust that the magic that helped you through the first phase is still there. Take a breath and a pause, and you'll be on the other side in no time. So I'm holding on to that, I think a lot of us, we hit a wall and then we got through it. And then we're like, oh, this is actually kind of working. Things feel really good. And then I notice a lot of us have just kind of hit another wall again. So just trusting that we're going to move through it. And the same goes for our kids. Again, we can't make someone feel motivated. We know the most meaningful motivation is intrinsic motivation. So we want to look for that and take it where we can get it. So start with where our kids are motivated and see how you can build more of that into their world. I would say don't use it as a reward necessarily. Don't I think reward systems, in fact, again, the research shows that reward systems can actually be demotivating. So I wouldn't say do that. But if you can find ways to help your child connect with the things that really drive them and try to create more of those opportunities, that can help them to feel a little more motivated in general. And we also know that having a sense of control over one's life, that's true for us and true for kids, that's really critical to us feeling good, happy, successful. So if you can find ways to build opportunities for your kids to control aspects of their lives, like real control, that can be helpful. Could be, what do you want for dinner? It could be, could be little things. It could be, hey, we're doing an outing this weekend for the family. Here are a couple ideas. Which one is most exciting to you? Or when would you like to do this, before dinner or after dinner? Like, find ways to give them true, genuine choice about things. And that is going to help them feel more respected, less defensive, less reactive, and kind of more grounded. And that will help them feel more motivated because they're not going to feel so put upon. Okay, the next thing I'm remembering right now is that it's normal for our kids to be experiencing a regression. This is happening, right? We are seeing behaviors maybe that we haven't seen in months or years right now. Our kids may be slipping academically. A lot of us were already worried about our child's, timeline and maybe lagging skills. And now that timeline may feel even more off. And so it's just helpful to remember that this is to be expected right now. And so what we want to do is stop fighting the reality of what is, because it's happening. So if we argue with that and we get upset about the fact, like, oh my gosh, my child is regressing, and that becomes the thing we're most upset about, they are regressing. So if we're going to continue to butt heads with that thought that's upsetting us so much. So if we can really just be like, yeah, this is a hard time. Kids are regressing because, they're going through something, and this is going to pass and they're going to catch up. Right. And we know that when kids feel safe and grounded and secure, they can learn things really quickly. Right. So this is a product of what's happening right now. We just want to remember it's normal. What we're seeing is normal within this context. All right. The next thing I'm keeping in mind, I mentioned this before, giving ourselves permission to lower the bar. So we may find that we don't have the same skills that we've had. We may not be as productive. We may be struggling with our own focus. Our work might be slipping. We just may not feel like we're rocking it, right? The way that we're used to. As a result, we might be beating ourselves up or judging ourselves or just feeling really bad about ourselves. And so I really want you to remember this, lower the bar. And the person who reminded me of this is Michelle Borba. She's a parenting expert who's written like 40 books on resiliency and stress and anxiety. And when Michelle Borba tells me to lower the bar, I'm going to listen. So just give yourself permission to do this. Like, it's okay. I'm going to just give myself a big pass right now because my surge capacity is depleted. I'm really not doing that well. I'm going to be kind to myself and lower the bar in terms of what I expect from myself right now. All right. The fourth of 5, we want to make sure our kids know that we have their back. So just remember that our kids are hitting their own wall too. They don't have the life experience that we have to to know that this is going to pass. This is their life, right? They haven't been through this kind of hardship and moved on, most of them. Differently wired kids often already feel like they're behind, or that they're not doing enough, or that things are harder for them. That feeling is also likely to be amplified right now. So I see our primary job in relation to our kids right now is to help them feel safe, seen, soothed, and secure. Those are the four S's that Tina Payne Bryson writes about in her book, The Power of Showing Up. So if we really focus on that, we want them to know we've got you. This is really hard. And we see that, and we know you're struggling, and you're going to get through this, and we're here for you, whatever you need, right? We want our kids to not just hear those words, we want them to feel that on a deep level. We want to reinforce that message every single day. All right. The last thing is we want to prioritize our self-care and self-compassion. That is going to support our whole family. I will just say self-care, I think it's a bad rap. It sounds very cliche and it may have lost its credibility, but I really, really, really hope that you feel this, that you hear this, that self-care is not an optional thing ever for any parent raising a differently wired child, but especially now. We need this more than ever. I talked about the surge capacity being depleted. This is the only thing we can do to refill that, and it's non-negotiable. So this is something we want to do every single day. We want to be proactive about our self-care. Even if we don't feel like doing them, if we know that going for a walk first thing in the morning helps us, do it. I did that this morning. I really love my time in bed scrolling through all my social media. And this morning I was like, Debbie, you have a busy day, get up and move your body. And so I did. And I had my podcast, and it was a really lovely, I took some pictures of the fall leaves. It was great. So we need to prioritize this. And I'll just say the way I define self-care is that it is something that's intentional and it's just for you. That's it. A walk, a shower, going to the toilet with your door closed and no one interrupting you, listening to a podcast while you're cooking dinner, spending 5 minutes reading a book in the middle of the day, having a coffee and not doing anything else while you're doing it. Like, it can look so many different ways. So think about what are the things that qualify for you, that kind of give you a little boost, and go with that. But every single day, I really challenge you guys to make sure you're doing something for yourself in this way. All right. So I'm going to take some questions. This is my contact information. Feel free to reach out. You can check out a chapter of my book if you like. If you text that number, or just check out my podcast. And I'm going to turn off sharing screens here. I have 2 mouses, 2 computers, and 2 keyboards in front of me. Let's see if I can do this. Okay. So I'm going to open this up so I can see any questions that have come in, and open up the chat. Someone asked what Seth's last name is. I see that right now. It's Seth Perler, Perler, SethPerler.com. He's amazing. And he has a lot of free resources and a great YouTube channel. So if you're looking for all kinds of strategies, he's your person. All right, so I have a couple questions I have gotten that I'm going to answer. I want to talk about 504s and IEPs right now, because a lot of people are wondering what to do. Another question just came up, what to do about this. And I actually just interviewed someone for my podcast who's an educational attorney, and we talked just about this. And what she said is that, first of all, we can have as many IEP meetings and 504 meetings as we want. That was news to me. She's like, oh yeah, a lot of people think it's a once and done thing. But actually we can request that meeting at any time, and we can request accommodations and the IEP be revised based on what's happening right now. So if you have a plan that is, you thought this is the plan for this year, but now, gosh, I'm stuck within it. If it doesn't work in this context and what's happening in your child's school, then it needs to be changed. So, and you have the legal right to that. Your child still has the right to, to FAPE, a free access to public education, and you get to ask for that. She really encourages us to push for what we want. She said, I'm going to just type a name in here because I know people want to connect with him. Okay. She said, ask for things. Again, I said, this is like the Wild West right now because there's no precedent for any of this, but she really encourages us to just, there's so much more that's often possible. We go into those meetings with a collaborative spirit and some solutions and just ask for what we want. Of course, there are advocates who can help if you're getting pushback from your school. But really push and ask for what you need, and don't be shy about asking for those meetings. It's your right to do that.
Debbie, it's Emily. I just want to also point out that there are a lot of questions in the Q&A box in addition to the
Yes,
chat. So I just want to make sure you knew that.
I have that open too. And I also have the ones you sent me before. There's a lot of questions happening here. Okay, I'll do the best I can. I just want to talk about Zoom fatigue and if kids are kind of not really showing up, how do we help our kids cope? And, I just want to reiterate again, we want to take things off our kids' plates if we can, like lower the demands. That can seem counterintuitive for a lot of us, but our kids really are feeling hyped up anxiety right now. And so anything I can do for you, I know this is really hard right now. We're not trying to make this all better, by the way. We're not trying to be like either talking them out of how they're feeling or fixing it. We can't fix it. And their feelings are valid, right? So the best thing that we can do is to empathize. And this is really hard. I see that. I know you can do hard things. Let me know if I can help. Just listening, holding the space. Don't get caught up in their own emotional challenges. Don't kind of buy into their stories, but rather kind of just hold that space for them to experience what they're experiencing and then move through that emotion and then hopefully come up with a plan or support them in another way. Because when we get through this, they're going to know that they got through this. And hopefully they're going to have some skills, some resiliency skills as well. Okay. So I'm just scrolling through here. I want to make sure that so in terms of paying attention in virtual classes, I got a lot of questions about this as well. We can't, again, make our kids pay attention. So what I want to just say for all kinds of questions like this, like how do I get my kid to do this? How do I make my kid do this? Again, we can't make them do these things. There's always a why behind everything. There's a why your child isn't paying attention to their Zoom classes. They might be bored. They might be anxious. They might be completely uninterested in the material. They might be getting distracted. There are so many things, but there's a reason, right? There's always a reason. Sometimes it's not so obvious what the reason is, but we want to try to discover with them what the reason is and then solve for that reason, right? Come up with strategies for that. I want to share a strategy approach that I think would be really helpful for people, and that is Dr. Ross Greene. If you guys don't know him, I'm going to type him in the chat. He wrote a book called The Explosive Child, and he is in other books, but that book is amazing if you've got an explosive kiddo. But he has something called the collaborative and proactive problem solving approach. This is a model he uses, but it's really about collaborating with our kids to help them with lagging skills and get their buy-in as we work through this. Because as he says, there is no, bad behavior, challenging behavior. Those are unsolved problems. Those are skills our kids don't have, and they don't have the tools to do anything different. So they're acting out. They're communicating with us. So this is just really important to always be thinking the things that are triggering us, the things that are annoying us, are frustrating us. We want to be like, okay, first of all, what am I making this mean for myself? Am I making this mean that I'm doing a bad job as a parent? Am I making this mean that my child's future is shot? Like, we might have this whole story going on in our minds. But then we also want to get uncover like, well, what is going on for my child? There's always a reason. And then that's where we want to communicate with our kid and be like, I notice this is happening. I notice that you're not paying any attention. What's up? And see, and try to start a dialogue and then see if together you can solve for that. Um, okay, so Ross Green, The Explosive Child. Yes, that's the name of the book. Okay. Um, Tips and tricks for teens to stay organized. I will just say that with teens, especially, buy-in is really important. And that is something we need. We can't do anything with a teen if they're not feeling bought into the process, especially when it comes to organizing. And a lot of these kids do have executive functioning challenges around the areas of organizing and planning and working on big projects and that kind of thing. I've written books for teenagers specifically about how to reach goals and organize and plan things, and still dealing with that in my house. So you always want to ask your child. We don't want to impose our solutions on them. We always want to ask, use that language. Would you be willing to? Would you be willing to try something? Ask them if they want your ideas, and kind of go from there. See if they'll be willing to give it a shot. All right. Someone in the Q&A said, do you have any recommendations for bringing a child down from an elevated, frustrated fight stage? Well, I would say that really our own energy is our superpower here. So if you've read the book, The Whole Brain Child by Dr. Dan Siegel and Tina Payne Bryson, they talk about the mirror neurons and that our kids are really reflecting what's happening. Like our brains are wired to reflect other people's emotions. And so if our child is elevated, frustrated, and we get, it's called flipping your lid. If we flip our lids too, well, probably y'all have experience with that. It's like pouring gasoline on a fire. And so what we really want to do is work on managing our own energy in those moments, which can be really hard. It can take practice, and we often get a lot of opportunities to practice. But when you're not in that moment, it's good to think about, okay, what are some coping skills that I can do in moments where I get triggered, moments where my child is dysregulated and I'm getting kind of caught up in it. And, for me, taking a couple breaths, deep breaths, holding it in, and then slowly releasing it. If I can remember in the moment to do that a couple times, it completely calms me down. And then if I'm in relation with my child, when he was little and would be having big things, if I could be in the space with that and just be like, you're really having a hard time right now, just slow down, lower my voice, keep my energy level, hold that space, it can end so much more quickly than if I kind of get caught up and I try to fix things and shift things. Sometimes humor can work too, by the way. A good joke or a pratfall can go a long way depending on what's happening with your child. But our superpower is our own energy. And if we can work on remaining calm, holding a space, empathizing, neuroscience shows us that our kids are going to match our energy. They are going to come down much, much sooner. And then after the fact, later on, is when you talk about what actually happened. And then you kind of talk about, what happened there and how can we work together to make sure that doesn't happen, or what could you have done differently in that moment? That's when actually the learning can happen. Okay. Yes, I'm just scrolling through my questions. I kind of answered that. I would say I got a question about a school administration starting to dock points. Actually, I got a couple questions like this. Schools are starting to dock points. If a kid is turning off their camera, then they're going to get marked absent, or they're kind of changing the way kids are being assessed based on participation in this new Zoom landscape. And I would say, I don't think that's cool. And again, advocate for what we know our kids need. Dr. Ross Green, who I've mentioned, I'm a fan, if you haven't noticed, his quote that I really just took to heart when I read it is that kids do well when they can. And if your child isn't participating or is really struggling with the format of school right now, um, then they're struggling, then they can't do better right now. And so we want to focus on that. And we want to try to collaborate with schools and teachers and in an honest and compassionate way. I do want to say that, I know there's a lot of people who are worried about being the squeaky, this, I always get metaphors mixed up, the squeaky wheel, and being that parent with schools and or being off-putting. I understand that. I have had those concerns in the past too. And there are ways to communicate with schools that don't have to feel antagonistic or that we're in this kind of power struggle. So, if we can always keep in mind our intention, which is to help our child have a more successful school experience so that they can feel good about themselves and reach their potential, right? That's our goal. And we also know that that's the goal of schools. Schools are in the business of helping kids, right? And so we want to try to approach those relationships as a collaboration and build an alliance with those teachers. And I use the phrase compassionate education. A lot of teachers they don't understand some of the ways that our kids are challenged, because that's just not part of their training. If kids with learning differences, executive functioning, slow processing, all of these different ways, they're not recognized by a lot of teachers because they just haven't learned about it. And so it can come off as poor behavior or disruptive behavior, or all of these negative things, and we just focus on the behavior. So we are in a great position to compassionately educate educators about who our kids are and what they need, and and approach it from a real problem solving collaborative way, and come with solutions and ask for what you need, and keep asking, but we can do it in a positive way. All right, I'm going to scroll over here. um, okay, yeah, so a lot of questions um, about staying focused. So the sacred study space, what do you do if your child refuses to set a sacred study space? Wants to work in a sofa, which is also his chillaxing place. I get that. I would try to be experimental about it, right? Maybe you can even make a game out of it, but maybe you could like go through the house and identify all the possible workplaces, put up labels, and say, let's try sofa just for homework for a week and see how that works out, or for schoolwork, and just experiment. And then a lot of this, because we want our kids to get to know themselves, we want them to understand what they need. So, after they work in a space, how did that feel? Did you feel really relaxed? Were you thinking about your game while you were supposed to be doing school? Like, always just be asking questions. Get them to think about, like, oh yeah, actually, I totally, because I was here, I totally wanted to be playing Roblox or whatever it is. Um, they may not get to that right away, but this is what we're working towards. We want our kids to start to understand what they need, and try their ideas. What I suggest with all of these things, if they, with a sacred study space, I wouldn't have a battle about it. I would say, okay, seems like I have one idea about this and you have another idea. What's your proposal? Let your child propose. Well, I'd like to do this and this here. All right, how will we know if it's successful? Well, it'll be successful if I get all my homework done. Okay, let's check in a week. We'll do it your way for a week, and then we'll check in and see if it actually worked. So that's part of the collaborative problem solving. But we want to try their ideas and do it with them. And again, that's how the learning can happen. That's how we can get buy-in. And you never know, maybe they can make it work because they'll be motivated because they really want to do it there. Okay.
Debbie, maybe we have time for just one more.
Okay. Sorry. I know you guys, there's so many questions. Um, okay. Let me just go to one more question down here. There was a child who was A 4-year-old boy cries easily on trivial things, often demands me to play with him while I should be working, and he should be playing or studying alone. I would just again say this isn't trivial. It may seem trivial to you, but it's not to your child. So always like first question that idea, like why should my child be playing alone? Like this is really hard for them. I can understand how that would not feel good, trying to find out what's behind the crying, and then making sure when you can do this problem solving with a 4-year-old, but make sure that you set in boundaries for yourself too. And with a child that young, there's probably going to be some growing pains here, but there's a way to empathize and validate their experience and set boundaries for yourself, and that actually is good modeling for our kids. And on top of that, just make sure that you do set aside good time to be 100% present and engaged in whatever your child wants to do. So that's part of like creating that scenario where you have your time that's just for you, and then you have time that's really special time with your child. Okay.
Debbie, thank you
Yes.
so much. There are so many questions. I will regroup with you to make sure that when we send out the follow-up to everyone, they get not only the recording, but all of the resources that you mentioned. And maybe we can group some of these other questions into responses since we didn't have enough time to get to all of them. I just want to say to the participants before you go, if you are one of the lucky ones whose company offers family care benefits, make sure you're enrolled in them. I'm sure most of us could use some extra care support right now. If you are on the line and your company does not offer these, please make sure to ask your HR team about them. They can provide some much needed work life support. As a reminder, we will be sharing a recording of this webinar out with you all within the next 24 hours. So again, thank you for joining. Have a wonderful day and please stay well and healthy. Thank you so much, Debbie.
Thank you.